London, 1815. Lord Lucas Devereux, the 4th Earl of Westmoreland, surveyed the opulent ballroom from behind a marble column with the practised detachment of a man who had attended far too many such gatherings. The chandeliers cast golden light across a sea of silk and satin as the ton's most eligible danced and flirted with calculated precision. He adjusted his perfectly tied cravat, expression as cold as the winter winds that rattled the grand windows of Halsworth House. Still lurking in shadows, Westmoreland. The Countess of Halsworth materialized beside him, her silver-streaked dark hair arranged in an elegant coiffure beneath a tiara that had adorned generations of her family. One might think you're avoiding something. Or perhaps someone. Lucas offered a bow that was technically perfect yet devoid of warmth. Lady Halsworth. Your observation skills remain undiminished by time. As does your talent for melancholy, she replied, tapping her closed fan against her gloved palm. It has been 3 years, Lucas. Eleanor would not have wished this perpetual mourning. At the mention of his late wife, Lucas felt the familiar hollowness expand within his chest. Some wounds do not heal, Countess, regardless of time's supposed mercies. Nonsense. You've simply decided they shall not. The Countess surveyed the room with the shrewd assessment of a general planning battle strategy. You were once the most sought-after gentleman in London. Now you attend social functions only to stand in corners and glower. It is most tiresome. I attend merely to prevent further gossip about my seclusion. Nothing more. And your estate? Your responsibilities? Your life? Will you neglect those indefinitely as well? When he remained silent, she sighed. I've invited my goddaughter to stay with me for the season. She arrives tomorrow, a lovely young woman of exceptional character. Lucas stiffened. If you intend to play matchmaker, I intend nothing of the sort, she interrupted, though the glint in her eyes belied her words. Zara Hampton has no interest in marriage. She comes to London solely to accompany her younger sister through her first season. Then we shall suit each other perfectly in our mutual disinterest, Lucas replied dryly. Perhaps. The Countess's mouth curved in the barest suggestion of a smile. Though I warn you, Westmoreland, she has a most disconcerting habit of seeing through pretense. I do not pretend, madam. I simply exist. And that, said the Countess with unexpected gentleness, is precisely the problem. The following afternoon found Lucas reluctantly calling at Halsworth House, fulfilling a promise made to the Countess regarding some estate matters. He had timed his visit specifically to avoid meeting her house guests, calculating that new arrivals would surely be resting after their journey. He was therefore unprepared to enter the Countess's drawing-room and find a young woman standing alone by the window, so absorbed in a book that she did not immediately notice his entrance. The butler announced him with quiet precision, Lord Westmoreland, Miss. She turned, and Lucas found himself momentarily without words. She was not a conventional beauty by society's rigid standards, her features too distinctive, her bearing too self-contained, but something about her arrested his attention completely. Dark chestnut hair was arranged simply but elegantly, and her blue morning dress, while fashionable, lacked the excessive ornamentation favored by most young ladies. Lord Westmoreland. She closed her book and offered a graceful curtsy. I apologize, Lady Halsworth was called away urgently to attend to her housekeeper. She asked that I convey her regrets and request you wait for her return. Lucas bowed. You must be Miss Hampton. Indeed. Zara Hampton. Her voice was melodious but unaffected. Lady Halsworth speaks of you often. Nothing favorable, I'm certain, he said with a sardonic lift of his eyebrow. To his surprise, the young woman laughed, not the practised titter of society misses, but a genuine sound of amusement. On the contrary. She describes you as brilliant, honorable, and insufferably stubborn. The last quality negates the first two, I should think. Not necessarily. Her eyes, he noticed, were an unusual shade of hazel, more amber than brown, clear and direct in their gaze. Stubbornness can be a virtue when in service to the right cause. And what cause would merit such dedication, in your estimation? He asked, surprised to find himself genuinely curious about her answer. She considered the question with a seriousness he rarely encountered in drawing rooms. Truth, perhaps. Or loyalty. Certainly love, though that seems to be in short supply in fashionable circles. Something in her unaffected manner caused Lucas to respond with unexpected candor. Love is a pleasant fiction indulged in by poets and the inexperienced. Society functions on far more practical arrangements. Is that observation or personal philosophy, my lord? She asked, her head tilting slightly. Experience, he said shortly, unwilling to elaborate. Her gaze held his for a moment longer than propriety strictly allowed. How disappointing to hear a definitive conclusion from one who has witnessed but a fraction of life's possibilities. Lucas felt an unfamiliar sensation, the desire to continue a conversation rather than end it. Before he could respond, however, the Countess swept into the room. Westmoreland. I see you've met my goddaughter. She looked between them with poorly disguised interest. I trust Zara has been entertaining you adequately. Miss Hampton has been most forthright in her philosophies, Lucas replied. A family trait, I'm afraid, Zara said with a small smile. My father claims I inherited my mother's inability to disguise my thoughts with polite fictions. A refreshing quality, the Countess declared, particularly in London, where sincerity is treated as a social disease to be quarantined. After discussing the estate matters that had brought him, Lucas found himself lingering longer than intended. Miss Hampton participated in their conversation with intelligent observations and an occasional flash of dry humor that surprised a reluctant laugh from him, a sound so unfamiliar that the Countess actually paused mid-sentence upon hearing it. When he finally took his leave, Lucas was disconcerted to realize he had enjoyed himself. The sensation was so foreign that he initially mistook it for indigestion. I believe Lord Westmoreland disapproves of me, Zara remarked to Lady Halsworth later that evening as they sat together in the Countess's private sitting room. Nonsense. Lucas disapproves of life in general these days. The Countess set aside her embroidery. He wasn't always so. Before Eleanor's death, he was quite different, charming, engaged, even occasionally frivolous. What happened to his wife? Zara asked softly. Childbed fever. The babe, a son, was stillborn. The Countess's expression grew somber. Lucas was utterly devoted to Eleanor. When he lost them both in a single night, something in him simply closed. He manages his estates with ruthless efficiency, fulfills his parliamentary duties without fail, but the man himself seems to have vanished behind a wall of ice. Zara gazed thoughtfully into the fire. People often say time heals all wounds, but I've found it merely teaches us to carry them differently. What a remarkably insightful observation for one so young, Lady Halsworth said. May I ask what personal experience prompts such wisdom? Zara smiled faintly. Nothing so dramatic as Lord Westmoreland's tragedy. My mother died when I was 12. My father retreated into scholarly pursuits, leaving me to essentially raise my younger siblings. I learned that grief transforms people, sometimes permanently. And did it transform you, my dear? Into someone more practical than romantic, certainly. Zara hesitated. I came to London with Catherine to ensure she has the season she deserves, not to seek marriage for myself. At 24, I've made peace with the likelihood of spinsterhood. Nonsense. You're in the prime of life. Perhaps, but I have no dowry to speak of, unfashionable opinions, and a face best described as interesting rather than beautiful. These are not qualities calculated to attract eligible gentlemen. You underestimate yourself, the Countess replied with a knowing smile. And perhaps underestimate certain eligible gentlemen as well. Over the following fortnight, Lucas found himself encountering Miss Hampton with suspicious frequency. At Lady Jerningham's musical evening, she was seated directly in his line of sight. At the Millbrooks' dinner party, she was placed beside him. At Vauxhall Gardens, he turned a corner and nearly collided with her as she examined a flowering shrub with scientific interest. The Countess is not particularly subtle in her machinations, he observed dryly after their third such encounter. Zara laughed. She believes herself the embodiment of cunning. I haven't the heart to disabuse her of the notion. They fell into step together along a gravel path, the lanterns of Vauxhall casting dappled shadows across the walkway. Around them, other couples strolled, voices blending with distant music. You seem remarkably tolerant of her interference, Lucas said. Lady Halsworth means well. And truthfully, your conversation is preferable to most gentlemen's empty flattery. I've offered you nothing but disagreement and cynicism, he pointed out. Yes, but honest disagreement. You speak to me as a thinking being, not an ornamental object to be charmed with practiced compliments. She glanced up at him. It's rather refreshing. Lucas found himself studying her profile in the golden lamplight. There was something compelling about her face, not the perfect symmetry so prized by society, but a character and intelligence that animated her features with something more interesting than mere beauty. You are an unusual woman, Miss Hampton. A mixed compliment at best, my lord, she replied with a raised eyebrow. It was not meant as a compliment at all, merely an observation. Then I shall choose to take it as a compliment nonetheless, she said with a slight smile. Being usual seems a terrible fate. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Zara's sister Catherine, a lovely girl of 18 whose golden curls and delicate features ensured she would never lack for admirers. Zara! Lord Havisham has offered to escort us to the supper boxes. Catherine's eyes widened slightly as she registered Lucas's presence. Oh. Lord Westmoreland, I did not see you. Lucas bowed formally. Miss Catherine. I was just returning Miss Hampton to your party. Were you? Zara asked with mild amusement. How gallant, considering I came here with Lady Halsworth, who appears to be deeply engaged in conversation with Lord Melbury approximately 20 yards in that direction. Lucas felt the unfamiliar sensation of being caught in a social misstep, something that had not happened to him in years. I merely assumed that all young ladies require escort and supervision. A common assumption, though not universally accurate. Her eyes held a gentle teasing that somehow removed any sting from her words. Catherine looked between them with obvious curiosity. Perhaps Lord Westmoreland would like to join us for supper. I'm certain his lordship has more pressing engagements, Zara said quickly, sparing him the necessity of finding a polite refusal. Lucas surprised himself by saying, Actually, I would be honored to join you, if Lady Halsworth has no objection. The evening that followed was unexpectedly pleasant. Lord Havisham proved an amiable young man whose obvious admiration for Catherine was tempered with genuine respect. The Countess observed the party with poorly disguised satisfaction, while Lucas found himself repeatedly drawn into conversation with Zara on topics ranging from agricultural innovations to the latest literary sensation. You've read Mrs. Radcliffe? He asked, genuinely surprised when she mentioned the Gothic novelist. All of her works. My father considers fiction a frivolous distraction, which naturally ensured I devoured every novel I could find. Her eyes danced with mischief. I particularly enjoyed The Mysteries of Udolpho, despite its implausibilities. I found the coincidences rather too convenient, Lucas admitted, then stopped short, realizing he had revealed his own familiarity with the novel. The fearsome Earl reads Gothic romances. Zara's voice was soft enough that only he could hear. How delightfully unexpected. Eleanor enjoyed them, he said after a moment. I read them aloud during her confinement. It was the first time he had mentioned his wife's name voluntarily in years. The realization struck him like a physical blow. Zara seemed to sense the shift in his mood. Rather than pressing or offering platitudes, she simply said she had excellent taste, then. In literature and in companionship. Something in her quiet acceptance allowed him to breathe again. The conversation moved to safer topics, but Lucas remained aware of a small crack in the wall he had built around memories of Eleanor, not painful, as he'd feared, but almost a relief, like opening a window in a room too long closed. As April blossomed into May, Lucas found himself accepting invitations he would normally have declined. At the Benningtons' ball, he even partnered Zara for a country dance, his first participation in such activities since Eleanor's death. The ton will be scandalized, he murmured as they moved through the figures of the dance. The notorious recluse, dancing. Properly shocking, she agreed solemnly. Next you'll be smiling in public, and society may never recover. I smile. You produce what might generously be described as a grimace, my lord. It bears the same resemblance to a smile as a turnip does to a peach. Lucas felt the corners of his mouth twitch upward involuntarily. Is frankness a Hampton family trait, or merely your personal specialty? Both, I should think. My father says what he believes without reservation, which made his career as a clergyman rather more eventful than the archbishop might have preferred. As they continued to dance, Lucas became aware of speculative glances from the matrons lining the ballroom. The Countess of Halsworth stood among them, looking insufferably pleased with herself. We appear to be the subject of considerable interest, he observed. People always notice when the most determined bachelor in London suddenly begins behaving like a social creature, Zara replied. They'll soon find more interesting gossip, I'm sure. But the ton did not move on to fresher scandals. Instead, Lucas found himself the subject of increasing speculation as his appearances at social events, invariably those attended by Miss Hampton, became more frequent. Whispers followed them. Was the Earl finally emerging from mourning? Had the unassuming Miss Hampton accomplished what a dozen more beautiful débutantes could not? Lucas told himself he sought Zara's company merely for her conversation, a rare commodity in London drawing-rooms. He ignored the way his pulse quickened when she entered a room, the way her laughter affected him, the way he found himself thinking of things to tell her throughout his days. The illusion he maintained crumbled one rainy afternoon in late May when he called at Halsworth House and found Zara alone in the library, seated on a window seat with a book open on her lap and tears streaming silently down her face. He stopped in the doorway, uncertain whether to withdraw or offer comfort. Miss Hampton? Are you unwell? She looked up, startled, and quickly wiped her cheeks. Lord Westmoreland. Forgive me, I didn't hear you enter. The butler announced me, but you seemed preoccupied. He hesitated, then stepped into the room, closing the door partially behind him. Has something happened? Is it your sister? No, nothing like that. She gave a watery laugh and held up her book. Fiction, I'm afraid. The heroine has just learned of her beloved's supposed death. A ridiculous reason for tears. Lucas crossed to the window seat and, after a moment's hesitation, sat beside her, maintaining a proper distance. Fiction often touches truths we guard ourselves against in daily life. Yes. She looked at him with those clear, direct eyes, now softened by emotion. That's precisely it. How strange that you understand. Strange indeed, he agreed quietly, acutely aware of the intimacy of the moment, not improper in any tangible way, and yet more revealing than any waltz or dinner conversation. A drop of rain slid down the window pane beside them, tracking a wandering path through the condensation. Lucas found himself following it with his eyes rather than meeting Zara's gaze. "May I ask you something, Lord Westmoreland?" she said after a moment. "I suspect you will regardless of my answer. Why do you seek my company?" The directness of her question startled him into looking at her. "You avoid most social interactions, yet you've attended 23 events in the past month, all of which I happened to attend as well." "You've been counting," he observed, deflecting. Answering a question with an observation is not the same as answering, "My lord." Lucas felt something shift inside him, the ice that had encased his heart for 3 years cracking under the steady warmth of her presence. "I find your conversation stimulating," he said carefully. "Is that all?" The moment stretched between them, fragile and laden with possibility. "No," he admitted finally. "That is not all." Before he could elaborate, the library door opened fully to admit Lady Halsworth and Catherine, returning from their shopping expedition. The moment shattered, but something fundamental had changed. In acknowledging that Zara meant more to him than mere conversation, Lucas had crossed a threshold he had believed permanently closed. The following week, Lucas found himself increasingly restless. He called at Halsworth House only to learn that Zara had taken Catherine to visit friends in Richmond for several days. He attended Lord and Lady Merrick's ball despite knowing she would not be present, and left after less than an hour, the evening flat and colourless without her observations. On the third day of her absence, he stood at the window of his study, staring unseeingly at the London streets below, when his butler entered with a letter. "From Lady Halsworth, my lord." Lucas broke the seal with uncharacteristic haste. "My dear Lucas, I write to you as an old friend concerned for your welfare. Rumors have reached me of your particular attentions to my goddaughter. While I initially encouraged your acquaintance, I now fear I may have done Zara a disservice. She has confided in me her growing attachment to you, which places me in a difficult position. You have made your feelings regarding remarriage abundantly clear over the years. I shall never love again, you once declared in this very house. While I sympathized with your grief, I now must protect Zara from its consequences. She is a woman of deep feeling beneath her practical exterior, and I cannot stand by while she develops hopes that you have no intention of fulfilling. Upon her return from Richmond, I have advised her to distance herself from your company. If your intentions are merely friendly, I ask that you respect this boundary. If they are more serious, then you must examine your heart and determine whether you are truly ready to release the past and embrace a future that includes love once more. With sincere affection and concern. Margaret Halsworth. Lucas read the letter twice, then set it carefully on his desk. The Countess's words forced him to confront truths he had been avoiding. He had indeed declared he would never love again, had built his entire existence around that certainty. And yet, in Zara's absence, his carefully ordered life felt hollow and meaningless. He spent the evening pacing his study, wrestling with emotions he had long suppressed. The memory of Eleanor was still present, still precious, but no longer dominated his every thought. When had that changed? He realized with a start that he had not visited her grave in over a month, the longest period since her death. What would Eleanor herself say? The question came unbidden, and with it, a memory, Eleanor in their garden, laughing as she told him not to be so serious, to remember joy existed even in difficulty. "Promise me you'll be happy," she had said during those final, terrible days. "Promise you won't shut yourself away from life." A promise he had broken within weeks of her death. Dawn found him still awake, but resolved. He would speak with Zara upon her return and make his feelings clear, whatever those feelings might be. The thought brought both terror and a strange, forgotten sensation he eventually recognized as hope. Zara and Catherine returned to London 3 days later. Lucas called at Halsworth House that very afternoon, only to be informed by the butler that Miss Hampton was not at home to visitors. "Perhaps you might convey a note." Lucas pressed a folded paper into the man's hand, along with a coin that ensured it would reach its destination. He waited in mounting tension for a response. None came. The following day, he tried again with the same result. On the third day, he encountered Lady Halsworth at Lady Jerningham's musical soiree. "She will not see me," he said without preamble when he managed to speak with the Countess privately. "Did you expect otherwise? Zara believes you incapable of the kind of attachment she deserves. And you reinforce this belief." "I merely stated facts as you yourself have presented them for 3 years," the Countess replied evenly. "If those facts have changed, the burden of proof lies with you, not with me or my goddaughter. How can I prove anything if she refuses to see me?" The Countess regarded him with unexpected sympathy. "For a man of considerable intelligence, you can be remarkably obtuse. Grand gestures may be the stuff of novels, Lucas, but sometimes the quietest demonstration of feeling speaks the loudest." She swept away, leaving him to ponder her cryptic advice. What quiet demonstration could possibly overcome both Zara's doubts and his own fearful hesitation? The answer came to him later that night as he reviewed his estate ledgers. Among the entries was a notation about the Dower House, a charming property on his estate that had stood empty since his grandmother's death years ago. Eleanor had planned to renovate it as a project during her confinement, sketching designs and collecting fabric samples in a portfolio that Lucas had locked away after her death, unable to bear the sight of her unrealized dreams. Now, in the quiet of his study, he unlocked the cabinet where he had stored all memories of Eleanor and removed the portfolio. Opening it released a faint scent of lavender, her favorite. For a moment, grief washed over him, but different now, a gentle sorrow rather than the crushing weight it had once been. "I think you would approve," he said softly to the empty room. "She sees me as I truly am, just as you did." The following morning, Lucas sent for his solicitor and set his plan in motion. A week passed with no word from Zara. Lucas threw himself into his project, visiting his country estate daily to oversee the work on the Dower House. The old pain of Eleanor's loss remained, but it no longer paralyzed him. Instead, he found himself incorporating elements of her designs into the renovations, feeling her approval rather than her absence. When he returned to London, he found an invitation waiting, the Countess of Halsworth's annual garden party, traditionally the last significant event before the end of the season. He knew Zara would be there, her sister's successful season would demand their attendance, and he made his preparations accordingly. The day of the party dawned clear and warm. Lucas dressed with particular care, choosing a blue coat that Eleanor had once claimed matched his eyes, his first acknowledgement of her preferences in years. The small act felt like a bridge between past and future rather than a betrayal. Halsworth House's gardens were in full bloom, the scent of roses heavy in the air as guests strolled manicured paths and gathered around refreshment tables. Lucas scanned the crowd, finally spotting Zara near a fountain, deep in conversation with Catherine and Lord Havisham. She looked lovely in a pale green gown, her chestnut hair arranged in a style more elaborate than her usual simple elegance, a concession to the importance of the occasion, perhaps. As he approached, she glanced up and their eyes met. Something flickered across her face, surprise, wariness, and something else he dared not name. Lord Westmoreland, Catherine greeted him with genuine pleasure. "How wonderful to see you." Lord Havisham bowed. "My lord." "Miss Catherine, Lord Havisham." Lucas inclined his head before turning to Zara. "Miss Hampton, might I request a moment of your time?" She hesitated, then nodded slightly. "A brief moment, perhaps." They walked in silence to a more secluded part of the garden where stone benches surrounded a small reflecting pool. Lucas was acutely aware of curious gazes following their progress. "You've been avoiding me," he said once they were relatively private. "Yes." Zara met his gaze directly, her composure perfect save for the slight tremor in her hands, which she clasped tightly before her. "Lady Halsworth made me aware that my regard for you had become noticeable. I thought it best to remove myself from a situation that could only lead to embarrassment for us both. And if I told you that I share that regard—" Her eyes widened slightly. "I would say you are confusing gratitude or friendship with something deeper. You've made your position on love and remarriage quite clear, my lord." "I have. And I was wrong." Lucas took a breath, finding courage in her unwavering gaze. "When Eleanor died, I believed that love was a singular experience, that having lost it once, I could never find it again. I built my life around that belief, constructed walls to protect myself from further pain." He took a step closer. "And then I met a woman whose quiet strength and unflinching honesty made those walls seem not like protection, but like a prison of my own making." Lucas, it was the first time she had used his given name, and the sound of it on her lips gave him courage to continue. "I am not offering you the devotion of a man who has never known loss," he said quietly. "I am offering you something more honest, the love of a man who understands its value precisely because he has felt its absence." Zara's composure faltered. "Lady Halsworth said you would never love again. And so I believed. I was mistaken." He reached for her hand, relieved when she did not pull away. "I have something to show you, if you'll permit me." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch and placed it in her palm. "Open it." She did, tipping the contents into her hand, a small iron key, obviously old and well used. "A key?" she asked, puzzled. "To the dower house on my estate in Hampshire. I've spent the past fortnight renovating it." He held her gaze steadily. "It stands empty, waiting for a mistress with decided opinions and a fondness for Gothic novels. A woman who might make it a home filled with conversation, laughter, and perhaps children." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Are you proposing to me, Lord Westmoreland?" Inelegantly, but sincerely. He took both her hands in his. "I love you, Zara Hampton. You awakened feelings I thought were buried forever. If you can accept a man who brings both a past and a future to offer, I would be honored to call you my wife." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she smiled, a radiant expression that transformed her face. "I have always preferred honesty to elegance," she said softly. "And I would rather have a man who knows the value of love because he has lost it, than one who has never truly understood its worth." "Is that a yes?" "It is a most definite yes." Around them, the garden continued in its genteel revelry, but Lucas was aware only of Zara, of the warmth of her hands in his, of the future suddenly opening before them. He was vaguely conscious of the Countess watching from a distance, her expression one of immense satisfaction. "Lady Halsworth will be insufferably pleased with herself," he murmured. Zara laughed, the sound as clear and joyful as it had been the first time he heard it. "She deserves to be. Though I suspect she had her doubts about whether her matchmaking would succeed." "She underestimated your quiet strength," Lucas said softly. "As did I, initially." "And you underestimated your capacity for healing," she replied, her eyes holding his with the direct gaze that had first captivated him. "Perhaps we have both discovered unexpected truths." "The first of many, I hope," he said, and for the first time in 3 years, Lucas Devereux smiled without reservation, the ice around his heart fully melted in the warmth of a love he had never expected to find again. They were married in September when the Hampshire countryside blazed with autumn colors. The ceremony was small but joyous, with Catherine serving as bridesmaid and the Countess watching with undisguised tears of happiness. That evening, Lucas led his bride to the dower house, now transformed into a warm and welcoming home that combined Eleanor's original vision with touches that were uniquely Zara's: bookshelves filled with novels both Gothic and philosophical, comfortable chairs arranged for conversation, and windows designed to capture both morning and evening light. "Do you approve?" he asked as she explored the rooms, her fingers trailing over surfaces that would now be part of their shared life. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Though I am curious about one thing." "Only one?" "Your restraint is admirable." She smiled at his teasing. "The library contains a mahogany box I've not seen before." "It's locked." Lucas drew a second key from his pocket, smaller than the one he had given her during his proposal. "I had intended to show you tomorrow, but perhaps now is better." He led her to the library where the box sat on a desk by the window. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and he opened the lid to reveal a collection of items: a pressed flower, a small portrait, letters tied with faded ribbon. "Mementos of Eleanor," he said quietly. "Not hidden away any longer, but not displayed prominently either. A part of our home, as she is a part of me, but not overshadowing our life together." Zara touched his face gently. "Thank you for trusting me with her memory." "And with my heart," he added, drawing her into his arms. Both were locked away too long. As twilight deepened into night, Lucas Devereux held his wife close, marveling at the journey that had brought him from frozen grief to this moment of perfect contentment. The Countess had been right. After all, his declaration that he would never love again had proved false, undone by the quiet strength of a remarkable woman who had seen through his defenses to the man beneath. And for that, he would be forever grateful.